Good morning, everybody. I think we start. If any of you would like to come closer, you're welcome. If you feel fine there, you just stay where you are. But we have ample of space here. So, workshop ensuring a secure global transport system is quite a risky thing. As you can see, you got a new chairman today. The chairman who was to do this job fell ill, and my colleague, the Deputy Director General for General Transport Policy in Berlin, she also fell ill. So must be a dangerous job to chair such a round table. So I came in. My name is Axel Göhr. I'm Director for Civil Aviation Policy in the German Ministry of Transport. I'm based in Bonn, not too far away from Sabine Wiedemann. I can see her office tower, which is a splendid building. And maybe some of our thoughts are a bit influenced by this German way of thinking and tackling this task, which is really a big one for all of us, I know. I took up my job as director for the Berlin liaison office of the Ministry of Transport. As you know, we have split our administration between Bonn and Berlin. And it was exactly in January 2001. So 9/11 was just in the beginning of of this way of job life. And I attended one of these high-level meetings and seeing even ministers not knowing how to react, whether their reaction would be appropriate or not. And this feeling from those days, in a way, still has an influence and impact on what we are doing and thinking of now. There's a splendid introduction into this workshop saying that we need highest standard of security in transport systems, but it's also said it must be appropriate and affordable. So we are between these two points, and it's an ongoing discussion because the terrorists are also, unfortunately, quite inventive, and so we cannot stick to what we have achieved, and we have to rethink these challenges. And I think coming together here is to gather thoughts, to rethink positions, and hopefully for all of us to take some impressions with us, which will help us to model our job also in future. We have excellent participants around this table. There's still a missing link, but Mark Miller, as far as I know, is more specialized in maritime transport, which will cope the second half of this meeting. And we'll start with civil aviation with Bob Poole and Vlad Olteanu. This will be our start. Bob will give a presentation, and then it's Vlad from the International Airport Association. So we'll get this view on this, and later on we'll come to a broader scale. We, at any time, once we have a discussion, I would like to encourage you, if you have some idea of maritime things, you need not wait until after the coffee break, but you just come in with them, because it doesn't matter whether a parcel flies or is on the waterway. It always has to be safe and secure. We need not split it up. This will be the first part of this meeting, and normally I've seen that yesterday as well. And my impression is that it is quite a good experience to start discussion around the table, and then I hopefully get many thoughts also from the audience, so we have more or less a dialogue. And so after this introduction, I would like to ask Bob, and you can see, read the biographies of all of us around this table here. But in case you have questions, do not hesitate, or if you like to introduce yourself shortly, you're welcome. Bob, please.
Thank you very much, Axel. Good morning, everyone. You have, I understand, a CD-ROM in your program material, and I urge you, I hope my presentation will provoke you to read the paper on which this presentation is based, because I can really only skim over the surface of it in the few minutes that I have this morning. But let me explain what I'm going to try to do in the overview. First, talk a little bit about the overall framework of confronting terrorism as a threat to transportation. And look at some of the difficulties we have in trying to measure the effectiveness of different policies to try to counteract it. Then I will point out an approach that I think has some merit, that doesn't try to do benefit-cost analysis because of the problems that are involved in that, but does look at something called relative cost-effectiveness as a way to try to figure out which measures are worth what they cost and which ones maybe aren't. Then the heart of the paper is really a comparative analysis of how aviation security policy has evolved, particularly since 9/11, in Canada, the EU, and the United States, and compare and contrast, look at where they're similar and where they're different. And then based on that, try to present a framework for adopting a more risk-based approach, where we allocate resources more directly in proportion to where the threats seem most acute, and then try to draw a few conclusions from that. So let's begin then with the macro level considerations. Some of this may be quite familiar to you, but I'd like to just briefly summarize anyway. People who've been looking at terrorism full-time for many, many years point out that it's really an example of an asymmetric situation. For one thing, in free societies, we have created what to terrorists constitute a target-rich environment. Basically, everything that we depend upon is a potential target. So that makes it very easy for terrorists to be able to pick and choose targets at their own discretion. If our primary approach is target hardening, we basically have to harden everything, which is very problematic in terms of spending our entire gross domestic product on trying to live in a fortress. So it's a very difficult problem then to figure out what's an effective strategy. And generally speaking, target hardening is not a wise or affordable strategy. And yet that seems to be the approach that we adopt in transportation infrastructure. So that we'll get back to that in a bit. Benefit cost analysis is really far more difficult in terrorism than it is in many other policy areas, because the benefits are avoiding incidents which it's almost impossible to assess the probability of occurrence. In safety analysis, we can look at empirical data and have some idea of estimating how likely a particular event is, and then you obviously can calculate the cost of if that event occurs. You can calculate the cost of a particular terrorism event, but its objective probability of occurrence is almost unknowable. So it's very difficult, and I discuss a paper that really lays that out very clearly. And then also we have empirical analyses of terrorist groups, which didn't start with 9/11. It's been going on for decades. And Rand Corporation in particular did one that I think is very useful, called Breaching the Fortress Wall, that warns again against building inflexible static defenses, because terrorists are flexible, terrorists adapt, they learn how to go around walls or underneath walls. And so there's a real serious warning there that should help shape our policies. And that is that defenses that we do adopt need to be flexible and dynamic rather than being static. So that's the general context that I wanted to set before now, talking about more specifically what we can do. And here's this relative cost-effectiveness approach I discovered in a paper from an Australian university by Stewart and Mueller. They said, look, even though we don't know the objective probability of occurrence of a terrorist event, we can still compare defensive measures if you make some assumption, on a given assumption of the probability that an event occurs every n years, we can apply something that comes up in the regular analysis of safety regulations, and that is the annual cost per life saved, and compare the relative to various measures against an assumed possibility or probability of a terrorist event occurring. If you have 5 different measures that might be a counter to that, look at the cost and effectiveness of each of them on that basis, not in an absolute sense, but in a relative sense. And so they actually apply that analysis to a specific aviation security situation, looking at the cost effectiveness of sky marshals on board flights in comparison to the hardened cockpit doors. And using defensible assumptions, they show that the hardened cockpit doors are more than 200 times as cost-effective as sky marshals, basically because the hardened cockpit doors is a one-time cost, it's a capital cost, whereas sky marshals are a very expensive ongoing labor cost, and sky marshals are only on a fraction of planes, whereas doors are on all planes. And so over a wide range of possible assumptions about how often an event occurs that either sky marshals or hardened cockpit doors would prevent, you can pretty easily convince yourself with numbers that one is much more cost effective than the other. So that's an illustration of within a bounded framework, how you can actually apply a quantitative analysis and make some plausible conclusions about what makes sense to spend money on. So that's the other piece of background. Now, let's look at the comparative approaches in Canada, in Europe, and the United States. In all 3 settings, there was the same general evolution of aviation security policies. Hijackings began in the 1970s, and that led to initial screening mechanisms at airports, but nothing like the regime we have today. ICAO's Annex 17 is a basic framework for all ICAO countries that says there should be certain types of approaches used. But in all cases, these regimes have been amended and evolved as we moved from simple hijackings as taking over planes and holding out for ransom to the more advanced threat of putting bombs on planes, like the Pan Am Lockerbie incident, and then the suicide terrorists taking over planes and commandeering them and using them as weapons. So each escalation has led to an escalation in policy. The 9/11 event specifically led to the creation of the Transportation Security Administration in the United States, a different organization called CATSA in Canada, and to an EU-wide policy that was initiated in 2002 and was amended last year. So I looked at several questions. One of them is who pays for aviation security? And there is a range of arrangements. In Canada, aviation security is 100% paid for by the aviation sector. In other words, the users or the mode of transport pays a tax that covers all of the things that CATSA does, airport screening and sky marshals, and it paid for the hardened cockpit doors. In Europe, it's a country-by-country variation, but it mostly is made up of various airport charges and taxes. So that it's largely, again, the users of air transportation that pay the costs of aviation security. In the United States, by contrast, only about half of the TSA's aviation costs are funded by a tax on passenger tickets and a tax directly on airlines. The balance of federal spending comes from the general fund of the federal budget. And so that means you basically have the costs split between general taxpayers and users of the aviation sector. And you'll hear in all of these settings, in Canada, in Europe, and the United States, people from the aviation sector argue that security in aviation is a kind of national defense expense and should be paid for out of general taxes. But I will argue that there's a case, on the other hand, for the mode-specific funding, and I'll get to that a little bit later in the presentation. The next question I looked at is who actually provides the security, as apart from who pays for it. And in Canada, they created a Crown Corporation that is responsible for implementing the various security policies, CATSA, and it is regulated for policy and overseen by Transport Canada, but this nonprofit Crown Corporation, funded 100% by user tax, provides the screening. On the other hand, though, it does not use its own employees. It outsources to about a dozen security firms, and that's a similar situation to what exists at most large European airports in most countries, is that the security, which is the responsibility of the airports directly, is outsourced in terms of actual provision. In the United States, however, it's almost entirely centralized. The TSA, Transportation Security Administration, directly employs all of the screening personnel for baggage and passengers. It's centrally funded and allocated, and the even allocation of staff to airports is done on an annual budget basis, which is very inflexible and makes it hard to match the staffing requirements to the changing needs of the individual airports. One of the big virtues, as I describe in the paper, of the outsourced approach is flexibility. That in terms of changing security threats as well as changing aviation activity, it's easier with an outsourced situation to adjust the staffing requirements as needed, as changing times dictate. It's much harder to do with full-time civil servants. Now, finally, really probably the heart of the paper is how risk-based are the security policy, the aviation policies in place in these three types of jurisdictions. Everywhere you find risk-based language, and that's definitely, it's included in ICAO Annex 17, policy should be threat-based, risk-assessed. But on the other hand, the same ICAO policy then spells out in detail, you must provide this, 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 and this, as opposed to setting performance specifications and saying, now you need to meet those performance requirements, which should be output measures, instead specifies input measures. In Canada, the advisory panel that was set up after 5 years to advise the government on CATSA policy and the Canadian Auditor General both called for moving toward more risk-based policies, but so far there's really been no significant changes in Canada. And likewise, in the United States, TSA and its parent agency, the Department of Homeland Security, use a lot of risk assessment rhetoric, but again, there's very little in practice. By contrast, everywhere in the world of cargo, the general rule has been toward a more risk-based approach. Known shipper policies are an example, random screening as opposed to 100% screening, intelligent use of intelligence information to decide where are high-risk targets. This has generally been the practice in air cargo as it has been in maritime and surface transport. The one exception that's been much talked about in passenger air transportation is something called registered traveler. The idea that you would create a set of pre-screened frequent travelers who would have be vetted by a background check, then carry a biometrically encoded identification card that says this person doesn't need as intensive a screening when they get to the airport because they've already been vetted. It's the analogy of having a security clearance, which many people in civilian life who work for government or for defense contractors have. Those people have been vetted in advance and should not be considered to be a threat in the same manner as random people. But although something called registered traveler exists in the United States, it's not a risk-based program. The people that, such as myself, who applied immediately when it became available and went through the rigmarole, had all of our fingerprints taken and our irises scanned, find out that once we have the card, the only thing we don't have to do is stand in the long line to get to the checkpoint. When we get there, we still go through exactly the same security rigmarole because the TSA, it turns out, never did a background check. The only thing they do is run the name against their watch list, which is the exact same thing they do with every other air traveler at the point when the ticket is purchased. So there's no, it's a farce in terms of what the original intent was supposed to be. And this, to me, illustrates some kind of institutional resistance within the TSA to actually allowing the program to be a risk-based program. Now, I do try to set out in the paper, if we were serious about a risk-based approach to passengers and their luggage, what would that be? We would change the emphasis from trying to detect dangerous objects and assuming also that every passenger is equally likely to be a threat. We instead would say the purpose is to keep dangerous objects off planes, and we allocate our screening resources in proportion to the risk and therefore in proportion to the perceived dangerousness of passengers and their likelihood of being a threat. And that would mean you'd have something like a registered traveler program and encourage people to apply and take themselves out of the large haystack and make the generalized haystack smaller and have a set of people that wouldn't need to have many resources spent on them. And use the savings to increase security in other areas of air transport, such as the ramp area and throughout the terminal, where large concentrations of people represent obvious targets for suicide bombers. But very little seems to be being done on those areas. And so I suggest an outline in the paper, a three-tier approach. It could be two, it could be more tiers, but I suggest three, with the low-risk people being those that succeed in getting accepted into a registered traveler program, high-risk people being those identified as risks by intelligence information or about whom you know so little that you have to assume the worst, and ordinary travelers being everyone else, mostly probably people who fly occasionally and probably mostly leisure travelers who would get something like today's set of security measures. And the passenger screening, the registered travelers would get, as the original intent was, an expedited screening that would not involve things like removing jackets or laptops and so forth. And high-risk travelers would have something akin to the secondary screening that we see today that would be mandatory for that whole category. Baggage screening, you could also streamline that, and registered travelers would not have to have their luggage go through as rigorous a procedure. The RAND Corporation did an assessment and estimated that the number of, in the United States at least, the number of expensive explosive detection system machines that cost about $1 million apiece could be cut in half, as well as the cost of the labor that is used to feed bags into them, if we had a widely used registered traveler program. And the policy said that registered travelers' bags only randomly would be sent through those expensive machines. So some broad conclusions, and I have 6 of them. First, that target hardening is inherently a problematical approach given the asymmetry between terrorists and civil society. But as a practical matter, since aviation is and will probably remain a high-profile target for terrorism, we have to do something like target hardening, but we should try to do it in a more risk-based manner, and that relative cost effectiveness on the analogy with safety regulation assessment is a workable tool where you have alternative security measures that you want to assess and see which ones give you more value for the dollar spent. A risk-based approach would allow you to shift resources to those areas that produce more real value for the dollar spent by not spending it as on other areas. Risk-based measures should also be flexible and able to change configuration in response to new information, and that means you should favor outsourcing of personnel where possible in order to be flexible and make it easy to change the numbers of people assigned to various functions. Also, I will get back to the point about mode-specific funding, that if you do put the cost burden on the specific industry, you then create a countervailing force toward the natural expansion of, by political considerations of poorly justified measures. You have an industry group that will be vigilant, will monitor those expenditures, and will advocate for more risk-based and more cost-justified policies. And so that, I think, is an important argument in favor of mode-specific funding as opposed to general taxpayer funding. And finally, my saddest conclusion is that the biggest obstacle to a risk-based approach is elected officials who prefer dramatic, visible measures that tend to be static and tend to be exactly the opposite of what good analysis suggests as wise policy. And I wish I had a good answer for dealing with that conundrum, but I don't. Other than forums like this that at least solidify expert opinion and give us hope of reaching elected officials at some point with wiser ideas. And with that, I will stop, and thank you very much.
Bob, that was excellent. Thank you very much. I think if you like, you also can clap your hands a little bit.
Or not.
Because, well, this was in a nutshell all very essential things and not easy to tackle. And now I give the floor to Vlad. The view of the airports is also important because, as mentioned by Bob previously, airports are within the target of terrorism, and so they have to make sure that security is provided there to a high degree. So, Vlad, there's no presentation, but which is a challenge for our ears to listen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good morning, everybody. I would have loved to contradict you and say that airports are not a target for the terrorists, but unfortunately I can't. They are one of the main targets for terrorist activity, as shown by different developments since 2001 until today, just to quote the more recent ones. I will start my short presentation here with telling you a few words about ACI Europe, about who ACI Europe is and who do we represent. ACI Europe is an association representing 440 airports within Europe, that is European Union, 27 member states plus 18 other states. From a security perspective, however, I tend not to quote 440 airports, I tend to quote very many terminals with very many different needs and different settings. We have also some business partners, about 172, and we have 5 national associations within ACI Europe. I cannot skip, actually, after this short introduction to ACI Europe, the current crisis and the current financial problems that the airports have, because they have an impact on security as well, we like it or not. In between 2003 and 2007, in terms of traffic growth, passenger traffic growth, our airports have seen a 42.5% growth within European Union. Since the beginning of the financial crisis until now, we have seen a decrease of about 10 to 15%, which is quite significant. Because of that, obviously, the budgets of the airports have been heavily affected. And if you look at what costs a lot in running an airport, security comes as a very high cost, up to 35% of the operating costs of airports are security-based costs. Up to 35, up to. I clearly say up to 35. I could have said more, because if you look at a small airport, typical structure, there it will be higher than in a larger airport, obviously. The problem is that if you are able to cut some costs in some other areas, in the security area, it is very, very difficult, very, very hard to cut costs and not impact on the operations in a significant way. We are trying to actually look at this current situation and try to start with the end in mind. What is the end? What do we want to achieve in terms of security? We want to achieve something easy and very difficult at the same time. It's easy to state it, it's very difficult to do it. Stating it is basically finding the right balance in between facilitation and security. Whatever we do in the security terms, we do it for the passenger. So we need to facilitate passenger life, enhance his experience, and at the same time ensure a high security standard applied all over the European Union. Why all over the European Union? Because we are talking about a one-stop security space. Hopefully it will become functional soon with some regulators' help. We are also discussing the one-stop security not only at the European Union level, but more and more at a global level. We are discussing it at an American level, United States, Canadian level, and then creating convergence in between the two areas and then creating a one-stop transatlantic as a model to globalize it at a later point in time. In all this one-stop security, what we want to achieve basically is exactly what I've stated before. Increase facilitation, but maintain a very high standard of security measures. It is therefore more and more important that when you design such measures, you design them with the end in mind. So you design them thinking of the one-stop security space more than at the national fortress. More you think national fortress, less you are going to achieve a one-stop security space, which will be a functional one. Some security challenges which are in front of us within, I don't think only the European Union, I think generally and globally, Europe and the United States, will be what it is called in Europe the roadmap for liquids, aerosols and gels. It has different names in different places, but the problem is a global problem today. And beginning with the end in mind again, beginning with the fact that we need to facilitate the travel experience, passengers' experience, we need to think about ways to deal with the liquids screening regime and confiscation regime. In a functional approach, if you'd like, it has to be, whatever we create as a system, has to be practicable, workable within an airport environment, and has to be passenger-friendly. Confiscation of liquids currently are one of the most unliked measures, security measures perceived by the passengers, together with, guess it or not, removal of shoes for screening in our airports. I will just mention that passengers usually like it more in the US than in Europe. And obviously, I see some faces asking already the question, why? Yes, why? It's a very good question. Well, it's very simple. Passengers like usually predictability. They like to be able to predict what security regime will be applied to them. Us as security experts usually would like unpredictability. From a passenger facilitation perspective, in the US, it is highly predictable that you will have to remove your shoes each time you go through a screening point. It is highly unpredictable, however, in Europe. It is very difficult. When I ask, usually I ask even security experts, can you quote me 5 airports in Europe in which you have to remove your shoes? Usually I get about 3 good answers and 2 wrong answers. All 5 of them would have been correct 1 month ago. But because of more stringent measures being in place, different nations are changing according to a perceived threat level, the security regime applicable. Now, from a security perspective, again, unpredictability is not bad. It's actually very good. From a facilitation perspective, it is a disaster. Passengers highly dislike it. Going from passengers to political passengers, what I call political men, that is one of the biggest challenges in front of us. if you have watched attentively what happened in the European Union lately, we had a very intense debate on the body scanners in the European Parliament, with a report from the European Parliament and with a task force being created by the European Commission to address the problem of body scanners. The high sensitiveness of the security of aviation security has reached political levels, which can decide, and which actually do decide, on what we can and what we can't use in the security environment, which actually at this point in time and has created bigger disparities than similarities in between the different spaces, hence making it even more challenging and difficult to create a functional one-stop security in between the two areas. To give you one example, within a matter of months, most probably, the TSA would have implemented a body scanner program, whole body imager, as they like to call it, in the United States. The same situation will not be a reality, unfortunately, in Europe. Not this year, certainly. We'll see what the future will bring us. It will then create, again, disparities in between the screening of passengers, and it will then even further delay the one-stop security being a reality. We all agree from a security perspective that body scanners are a very effective way of screening passenger, much more effective than a metal detector, traditional metal detector, which addresses essentially threats coming from metal items, as its name rightly says it. We also have one challenge in front of us, and Bob mentioned it in his presentation, the financing of aviation security with very, very different models in place. If we are going to be effective, we depend very much on technology. I've quoted on body scanners. I can go ahead with a roadmap for liquids. If we are serious about screening liquid explosives, we need efficient and very good technology to be able to do that. Efficient and very good technology usually comes at a high price. And that price has to be paid by somebody. Should it be the taxpayer? Should it be the user? Should it be a mixture of both? Actually, what are we trying to achieve by doing aviation security? Do we try to protect only the consumer, the passenger? Do we try to protect the community as well? If a plane explodes in air, it's an in-flight incident. An in-flight incident typically would affect, and mainly would affect, the passenger. However, the same plane, and we saw it unfortunately in the 201 events, we can see it, hopefully will not, but we can still see it. We cannot exclude it, at least at this point in time. The intelligence reports show that this is a credible possibility and distinct possibility. If the same plane will go against the building, I don't want to be very dramatic, but if that building is a nuclear plant, who are we trying to protect by doing aviation security measures? The taxpayer or the passenger? If it is a mixture of two, then the financing should follow the logic. It should be a mixture of public financing and of private financing. To give you one example, one clear example, which is happening right now as we are speaking, President Obama has, in the United States, affected $1 billion in the rescue plan for aviation security, for airport aviation security. That has created the possibility for the United States and for the TSA to buy expensive equipment and deploy it. It has created the possibility for the United States not only to enforce its one-stop security policy, but also to be able to put, for instance, for cabin baggage screening, 3D screening systems, which are, I hope we all agree, much better in terms of security characteristics than the 2D systems in place in Europe today. Without, I will not say the same level of public financing, but a very important level of public financing in Europe, we will not be able to do this before quite a long time. It is a high level of investment which is demanded. The manufacturers have a limited capacity of manufacturing, and we need to ensure that, whatever orders are made now will only become available in a year, 2 years from now, actually. And now we are in the middle of a financial crisis. It is very difficult to go to the CEO and ask the CEO, hey, can you invest about 200 million, and we'll see what the benefits of that will be later. In order to make such an investment, besides financing, what is very, very important is regulatory clarity. In order to make an investment, we need to understand, first of all, what the regulations will ask for from us. What do we need to implement? If we know what we need to implement, we may find ways to invest in equipment which will help us implement the regulation. In terms of having regulatory clarity, a lot of dialogue is needed with the regulators, obviously, and along the lines of a functional risk-based approach. I will not go again through Bob's presentation before, with all the risk-based elements with whom I fully agree. But it has to be a functional risk-based approach. More too often today, regulators are actually duplicating many of the measures, are trying to ensure 100% security. And we all know 100% security is a dream, a very nice dream, but it's still a dream. It is not a reality, and it will not be a reality before long, most probably. We also need, after having regulatory clarity, functional risk-based approach, a coherent implementation based on best practices. And this is what we are trying to achieve together with the Security Committee at the ACI Europe level with our airports. Try and find a coherent way to implement the different regulatory requirements based on best practices, based on, if you want, a problem-solving exercise. Who had the problem before? How was the problem addressed? What are the conclusions? What was the analysis of addressing the problem in that particular way? Will it work in your airport? And this is a very important question. Remember, I said we have 440 airports, but many more terminals. A solution which has worked in a particular environment doesn't necessarily work in a different environment. In order to make this happen, we basically look at planning. It starts with risk assessment. We try to be proactive. We try to think, to design, to implement, to analyze what we have implemented and correct what we have implemented. It goes through decision making. And finally, it goes through the management of the process. And in that one, I was discussing before with some members of the panel, we took the view that basically we can only manage what we can measure. And some things we can measure and are not very difficult to measure. For instance, the technological approach, the technological processes. We can measure things around technology. One thing which is extremely difficult to measure, yet is fundamental in ensuring aviation security at a high standard, is the human factor. How do you measure human performance? How do you set clear indicators on what a performant screener is? Today you measure performance around automated means, around machines. And if the human factor is good with a machine, we say the human factor is performant. This is a highly dependent machine look. It is not a very highly dependent human factor look. And I think this is one of our very, very important next challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vlad. I think my impression is we are entering into a transatlantic exchange of views, because already now I perceived two but different philosophies. It was with utmost interest, and I must admit, quite a lot of sympathy. I took notice of what you were saying, Bob. Institutional resistance when hinting at an institution in your country dealing with homeland affairs, which is quite a problem for, I must admit, also my colleagues here. And it's always on the list once this is a ministerial environment we are working in here. When ministers will meet, it's always on the list about these two different philosophies. And Vlad has pointed out that there are two different approaches. Indeed, it must be very helpful once you get 50% of the expense for security from the general budget, and not as is the case in Europe. Everybody, every airport, every passenger, every airline, every freight provider has to realize the cost of security. So I think this will also give floor to further discussion once we are moving to other transport modes and also to freight. You also have mentioned one point, and for little round table discussion that might be helpful, one-stop security. I think also for the public, one-stop security is a point affecting everybody of us once traveling. That's maybe a bit reassuring. Our colleague from Lufthansa, the highest boss, told us one day, well, his wife was late. She was traveling from their home place, Austria, to Hamburg, and had to change plane at Vienna. So she took a domestic section within Austria, Graz, Vienna, Vienna, Hamburg. And every time she was stopping, she was had to undergo a security check. Do these instruments really fit? And is this facilitation, if you realize the meaning of facilitation, it's more hampering, I think. So in this way, it's a bad joke. On the other hand, and that's what you also have pointed out, dramatic visible measures. Is it just window dressing? What's happening at the airports? Important, grimly looking guys taking your bag into this machine, and later you realize, oh, you've forgotten your little yogurt in it. So what? Huh? So it's always a balance between the two. I think you have given us a lot of food for our thoughts and for a first round table. And of course, it will be interesting also to hear a global player's view, shipping parcels by air and on the maritime way. So if you want to come in, please do so. The floor is to the panel. Who would like to start?
I
Bob.
actually wanted to comment on the body scanning issue that Vlad raised. It seems to me that the concerns in both the United States and in Europe about the intrusiveness of body scanning is, I mean, it's understandable that there's that concern, but the rationale for body scanning as much more effective than metal detectors against the threats that we actually face is inherent in the idea that every passenger is an equal threat and must receive the equal treatment. It's a direct consequence of that philosophy. If we didn't have that philosophy, then it certainly wouldn't be necessary to have something like a body scanning machine proposed for every single air traveler to pass through. That could be reserved for higher threat passengers. Certainly it wouldn't be necessary for registered travelers. People who've been pre-vetted and passed a background check would not have to routinely go through something as intrusive and privacy violating as that. But as long as we maintain the policy of 100% equal treatment for every passenger, I think logic forces us to something like body scanning for everyone. Otherwise, we're not doing the job of adequately detecting threats that are non-metallic that might be on anyone's person. So I think that may be a way of helping to dramatize for people the trade-off involved in questioning this assumption of equal threat among all air travelers.
Yes, thank you. Look, I agree with that, and I think there's another important point to this, that the travelling public understand that there is a need to do something, and they are willing to cooperate in these activities, but they also need to appreciate that the initiatives that they're being subjected to are in fact effective, and there are so many cases where any logical person can see that the measures are illogical. For example, on my way here, I went through an airport and there was a very intensive security process. My whole baggage and my hand baggage were x-rayed, after which they had some difficulties with something that was in my hand baggage, so that was physically examined. Okay, everything was fine, so I checked in my bag and then wandered into the general public area. After which, of course, they had to rescreen all the hand baggage. So and there are so many examples of this. For example, coming from Australia, those of you who are lucky enough to get to see Australia from time to time, you'll find that when you go on the final leg into Australia or you're coming out of Australia, we can't have metal knives. We have to have plastic knives. And obviously it's a security threat. But then equally, we can carry a litre bottle of scotch, which when smashed is quite a bit more dangerous than a plastic knife. So I think that whilst the public recognise that these things have to be done and are very willing to comply, they also need to understand that there is some logic behind the initiatives that are being introduced. Thanks.
Doesn't this call for international initiatives to bring together these philosophies?
Perhaps I might make a very brief comment here. There is a very high-level steering group that is working between the US and the EU, and most recently had a meeting in Brussels to discuss these issues that are just being tabled here. Also concerning the fact that the security measures, the approaches are in some ways different, but the idea is to look at the harmonization of these approaches. And I think, you know, again, we sitting here, we see different aspects of this, but there are efforts going on currently to look at addressing aviation security in a much more coherent and much more integrated fashion, including joint inspections of airports on both sides of the Atlantic. Obviously, this doesn't necessarily include nations other than the EU nations and the United States, but there is a model there that eventually could be used to approach other airports globally.
Thank you. Could I ask our colleague from German Post? Thank you for your...
Thank you. I would like to add one point. When we started to discuss about body scanner, I think the question is how we start the discussion in the public as well, and the role of the media. They play a very, very important role, and they have influence on all future measures. Even in Germany, we had a very ugly expression for body scanner, and it disrupted the whole discussion. And I think this is very, very difficult to start with a serious discussion and to convince the public that it is an added value. And this is a point, and I'm sometimes afraid of it when there are innovative ideas and good systems trying to be developed, and then due to unserious or difficult discussions, everything is led in a wrong, let me say, in a wrong direction.
Blood.
Yeah, I fully agree. I had to make quite a few interviews when the body scanners issue came into the press with the German name, I should call it, I mean, naked scanners. What I've always asked the journalists, and that was the first question, because their first question was, you as a passenger, you certainly don't like it. And my first question to them was always, you as a passenger, how much do you like the manual search? How much do you enjoy that? Because that is the alternative. Not to mention that in that alternative, I also decreased the security factor by a lot, because a manual search depends very, very much on the person doing it. Is that person doing the first manual search of the day? Is that person doing the 200th manual search of the day? Is it 10 o'clock in the evening in the airport and that person has a kid which is sick at home? If all those conditions are there, I decrease by a lot the security standard. And in terms of passenger facilitation, it's actually much worse. So what do you prefer, a 40 seconds manual search or an 8 seconds image? That is the real question. But I fully agree, it is a very, very difficult debate to have. The media took over, basically the debates. We have to come back one step and show the security advantages while showing that the privacy is not very much affected, or actually not affected. For instance, we do not store images of people. So all the discussions about what do we do with the images, well, we don't do anything with the image unless there is a public law requirement. So if a prosecutor or an officer says, we have found an item on that person, a gun, for instance, and we would like to keep the image because for the conviction purposes, we need that image as a proof. But besides that, we do not keep that image. I fully also agree with Bob that we shouldn't do this to all the passengers. I think more you do it, less security you have. Less you do it, more security you have, on the condition that you choose, very wisely, to whom you will apply the security measure. And I also, thank you very much, Mark, for the comments on the TSCG. Indeed, there is this Transport Security Cooperation Group, and I think the industry generally is very, very grateful to the regulators, in this case the European Commission and the Transport Security Administration in the US, for starting that dialogue, which brings us closer to a one-stop security discussion at this point, not functional space.
Thank you. You have mentioned the media, and I think this has come into a public discussion within the last years more and more, and also as representing the regulator side in this round table, but also in life. We have to bear in mind what their philosophy is. I think their philosophy is quite simple. They have to sell their papers. And today it's body scanning. And next week, that's another ugly example we have had in this country, and maybe this happens in all other countries as well. There are journalists hiring some cleaning lady at the airport in order to dismantle or to disguise where there are some leakages in the system. So on one hand, they reproach the regulator of too strict regulations about scanning everything and putting out shoes and whatsoever. On the other hand, next week, it will be just the other way around, telling us, well, what you are doing is not effective at all, and there's this and that leak, and forgetting the whole function also press should have, media have in a democratic society. That means they also have to contribute that society works well, and that working well means without terrorism. So that's another point for all of us to work on proportionate solutions. And of course, one important point for this also could be research, to discover the needs and to develop what means an appropriate solution. Do you have any idea? Yeah, Sabine, please.
Well, I would like to answer to your comments directly. The media is not only the one who would like to sell their papers, but there are other aspects. For example, when there is a new technology, we have to think about the impacts and to try to answer to all questions before we try to involve the public, especially data protection or health problems. I don't say that will mean health problems, but we have to answer to this question before we start the discussion. And this is our task as well, to think about the impacts instead of discussing it with the public who are not aware of all the aspects of security.
Data protection indeed is a very important matter, at least in our country. And there are lengthy discussions, for instance, when the US told us, well, for every passenger coming, visiting our country, we need to know who this is, and so on. I must say that the EU and also German travel branch has a bit resigned and said, okay, traveling within Europe, this would not be possible to get all the data from somebody, but the one who wants to go to New York or wheresoever willingly fills in all the forms and in order to comply with these requirements.
I just would like to build upon that a bit. In Switzerland, we also have an issue which was recently voted upon, which is the biometric passport. Because there is such concern with biometric data being placed on a chip on a passport, which has the possibility to be read by someone using a relatively simple handheld device. There has been a lot of discussion in Switzerland about the biometric passport and this issue of data protection. The other aspect that I would like to comment upon, which is something that our colleague from DHL just mentioned, is the issue of security and how the perception is about security. I think one of the aspects that was brought home to me by an official, and I will just say a North American official, who said to me, it's not the actual security itself, it's the perception of security that's important. Because the public also has to be feeling that they are safe and secure. It goes back to the comment of Dr. Widdowson concerning the fact that you can carry a liter bottle of scotch onto the plane and smash the bottle, and you've got a better knife than you would have even with a piece of metal. So it all comes down to, is there a positive perception of security? Is there a positive deterrence as well for a terrorist or a criminal to actually affect an act, because he knows that he has to pass a number of security gates. He may be able to get through some of them with some different technology or device, but maybe not all of them. So therefore, I come back to the issue of it's really the perception of security and even the deterrent effect of the perception of security, which has a positive element in this discussion.
Thank you, Mark. Perception, I think that's the balance. On one hand, it must convince. On the other hand, it should be much more than window dressing. And if there's the perception of just doing such a job, that's a bit dangerous. I think we still have some time, and we have had a long panel discussion here. I would like to open up and would like to ask if anybody in the public has some questions, contributions, so we might discuss them before breaking. Is there anybody? Yes. Could you please introduce yourself so we know who you are? Thank you.
Does it work? Yeah. My name is Zoltán Kazacsáy from the European Commission. I am the one who has to deal with transport security matters in DG TRAN. And I just heard the reference to the TSCG meeting. It was a very good meeting with the American partners. I just want to let you know that the security matters are discussed with different other partners as well in the world. So we have an ongoing cooperation with Australia, the United States, and Canada in one single group, which is called Quad. And we also have strong bilateral cooperation with specific countries like Israel, Japan, or Russia. And we consider it extremely important because the the things which I heard from you reinforced my earlier conviction that security will not stop at the borders. And security today is a global business, which should be tackled globally. If we do not do it, the individual member states are not going to be able to stop the terrorism on their borders. Especially the sensitive areas, which are, like in the case of the aviation activities, collecting a lot of people together are easy targets for the terrorists. And we should not forget about another area, which is the maritime, where it's not because of the passenger transportation, but because of the cargo transportation. The maritime sector is also an extremely sensitive area from this point of view. I heard a lot of interesting comments from you on the general perspectives and the general perception of the terrorism. It is true that people don't like the harassment and all the hassles which are related to the obstruction of the efficiency of the terrorism. But at the same time, nobody likes to be targeted to terrorist attacks. And you have to come to a compromise. Either we like it or not, we have to do something for that. A very interesting issue was the body scanners. Last year, we had a discussion with the European Parliament, which heavily opposed the introduction of the body scanners. So we thought that it would be a useful exercise to introduce them the real images of the body scanners, to show them how the whole system works, and try to convince them that probably it is not that bad at all. The reaction was interesting. On the spot, most of the members of the parliament accepted the necessity of having a body scanning approach. What Mr. Olteanu clearly said, it was a good argument. What do you prefer? Having a very quick body scanning in a rather neutral environment. The people who are watching the monitors are completely separated from the individuals who are passing through the machines, or you prefer having tapped by the individual security officers. Well, of course, there could be certain cases when you prefer it, but you should not forget that they are from the same sex, so it's going to have certain problems sometimes. Body scanning is an issue which is still to be solved. We modified the latest regulation concerning the aviation security. This is the one where Mr. Poole referred to, the 300/2008. And here we had to take out the body scanner from the list of the different ways how to improve the security level in the airports. Just a last comment, and as you can see, it's, now I have no questions. Probably later I will have, but now I don't have any questions. Because what you said, it's fully in line with those things which we had to work on together with you, together with the stakeholders, together with the international partners, and so on. The last thing was the liquids. The present regulation says that we have to change the liquid managing regime in April 2010. Now, this is going to have certain consequences on the budgets of the individual airports. And it is not easy to introduce a brand new regime because it needs brand new facilities, equipment, screening machines. and it needs a solid financing background. In the United States, according to my knowledge, and I was informed by TSA about that, this regime is going to be introduced next year. In their case, it is an easier situation because everything is going to be financed. Now I learned that it is only 50%, but probably there will be a bit more than that, financed by TSA. While in the case of the European airports, at the moment, it is up on the budget of the individual airports. And it is going to cause certain constraints in the budget of theirs, certainly for next year and probably for the years after. We also plan to come up with a transitional solution, first concentrating on certain actions like the transit passengers, for example, and then later by successfully introducing the one-stop security, which I am really happy to hear about. One-stop security could be probably one of the global solutions, at least from the point of Europe, but also from the point of the other continents. This one-stop security will probably reduce the additional costs concerning the security levels. We should not forget, however, one thing. Security is the #1 issue together with safety. The difference between the two is that safety is the interest of everybody. Even the terrorists like safety because it gives them a secure feeling. They can calculate. But in the case of the security, the situation is different. When we talk about security, indirectly we talk about destruction, the prevention of the destruction. And the terrorists' intention is to destroy everything in an unpredictable way. So harmonizing security systems, introducing overall and general systems, probably at the end of the day will have another impact on the security levels because they can calculate how the systems are working. So they will find new ways, and those who has the responsibility to protect must also find new ways to get further a bit in the level of the security everywhere. And once again, I have to highlight that it's not just about aviation. It's about all modes of transportation. It's about the land transportation at the same time. There are some countries in the world where the land transportation is probably more important from the point of the security than it is in the case in Europe. And there they developed rather sophisticated systems, which are probably not applicable everywhere in Europe or at all in Europe, but we have to learn from them. And security should be tackled in a global and uniform way together if we want to achieve success. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's very helpful to have the Commission with us, and being one of the member state representatives in Brussels, we are quite confident in the Commission negotiating, for instance, several aspects and the differences of philosophy between the European side and, say, the TSA. So we are looking forward to following your discussions, and of course we will contribute, and we are lucky, and that's what I say, not only for the government side but also for the industry, that also you will help everybody to find out feasible and realistic solutions which are also affordable. And of course this is not only for civil aviation, and we have another meeting after this little break when we will deal especially with maritime transport, where the challenges are a bit different, but the goal is the same. And of course, it is a challenge also for civil servants, for the regulator, to be more inventive than the terrorists, because you should not underestimate this. The way we are thinking is quite clear and predictable, and for them it's more or less the chaos. So I'm serious. That is why we also need support from the industry in the ways of our thoughts. We cannot make our legislation without any impact from the industry, from research people, because it is such a big challenge, and to follow the thoughts of terrorists may be crazy, but unfortunately it's necessary. We still have some time left, so I see a hand. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Peter Kraus from the International Road Transport Union, IRU. Actually representing a land transport mode, and I'm grateful to Mr. Kazachay that he made a hint to other modes of transport like land transport, such as trucking or passenger transport by road in coaches and buses. What I would like to draw attention to, if you allow, is public-private partnership, that business and government, they work together to increase the security level of the supply chain or the passenger mobility chain. If we focus on one of our major activities, trucking only, we are working in an open public environment, much more open than possibly any other transport mode, and therefore more at risk. An important facilitation measure would be, for example, again, focusing on trucking, goods transport by road, to eliminate unnecessary idling or waiting times at various sites, because in this open public environment, such unnecessary idling of our vehicles with important and valuable cargo on them increases the risks of various incidents, whether just criminal incidents or terrorist incidents. We have carried out a study, a survey, in cooperation with ECMT, today ITF, our host, 2 years ago, an important survey with more than 2,000 questionnaires answered by drivers, and we learned from these that over a 5-year period, 1/6 of the drivers have been attacked while carrying out their business activities on European roads. And what is even more surprising and worrying is that 40% of these attacks took place at parking areas, some of them so-called secure parking areas. We all know about the important lack of secure parking areas in Europe. Their numbers move from several 10,000s to maybe the magnitude of 100,000 truck parking areas missing in Europe, EU only. And important measures should be taken. Possibly an option would be public-private partnership now in the BOT concept, build, operate, transfer concept. But in any case, road infrastructure is not sufficient today just to have the line, but you should have the roadside facilities, such as secure parking areas. The other major risk for an industry which is operating in this open public environment is idling at borders. Not an issue within the European Union, but highly important all over the world, where there is the national border not only symbolically, but also for various checking activities. And for example, at the EU external borders, waiting times are still very high indeed. And again, trucks, loads, and human, together with the transport means, are at high risk. This is an important issue to tackle. I quickly would like to draw attention, again in the wide public-private partnership concept, to the importance of industry guidelines. We are overwhelmed by the jungle of regulations, laws, and they could be combined cleverly with industry self-regulatory measures, and it seems not to be the case. Partly, I would understand.
We have a round table here, and now, do you have any question?
Yeah, I didn't know I was allowed only to put question. So then I will put my question. Okay. So the question is, several of you speakers mentioned the importance of media in road transport regarding safety or security. Media and the public opinion is important. How would you sell your efficiency arguments, with which I agree? How would you sell to the public the truth that there is no 100% security? How would you sell to the public if something serious happens, that the countermeasures were not taken because they were economically not justified? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for these excellent questions, because they rise once again what we have been discussing this morning for civil aviation, and what our dear colleague from the IRU mentioned is really important. Seamless travel, first of all, seamless travel is not only by air, not only by sea, but also on the roads. And I fully agree with the problems which have been mentioned, and leading to, once again, to the need of ensuring a seamless travel, whatever this means, and also a secure transport. In the previous discussion, it already came through that 100% security hardly can be granted, as terrorists sometimes have thoughts we could not think of. So it's not everything predictable. And to be honest, my answer, and I might like to give my colleagues also the opportunity to answer on this. But from the political side, my answer would be to your question, which is very valid, to be sincere, to say the public, we cannot grant 100% security. We do our best, but nobody's perfect. No our political decision makers. We can foresee as much as possible, and this is our task. But unfortunately, we cannot foresee the craziest ideas or perceptions of terrorists. So we will continue to give you as much as security as possible, but we cannot exclude that one day somebody comes with an even crazier idea nobody could have thought of. But Bob.
I just would add to that, and I would phrase it in terms of not that we're cutting security by not spending on an idea that we conclude just doesn't give the bang for the buck, the value for the spending, but that we're shifting resources to areas that need more security, where we know the dollars will go farther. For example, if we go away from the premise that every air passenger needs the exact same resources spent on them and use some of the money that we save from that to expand the security on the ramp so that unauthorized people have less access to a plane to put a bomb on it from that way, as opposed to being a passenger carrying it on through the front door. I think that may help people to understand that we don't have unlimited money, and so it's incumbent on us to spend it in the wisest way, and that we can shift resources from low productivity uses to higher productivity uses, and that maybe we'll get across.
Thank you, Vlad.
I will try to be very brief. I know that the pause is coming and people like coffee. What I will try and say is basically, if you want to sell that idea, security is very much like an insurance. You may look at it like an insurance. Whenever you need the insurance, it's too late if you have not made it before. Now, how many people do you know which have insured against everything? Are you really insured against every single thing which may happen to you? I don't know many people who will answer to that, I'm 100% insured. So yourself, as a person, you will make a decision to insure against those things which are most likely to happen to you within the time horizon that you are taking your insurance for. What we are trying to do in terms of insuring as much as possible, as close as possible to 100%, there are many things. First of all, I think we moved globally from a historical perspective to more like a predictability-based, risk-based perspective in the last few years. If you look before, we were always historically based. What the terrorist has done already was the basis for what we'll do next in order to ensure that the terrorist is not coming back with the same idea again. That's why we have such nice and good whole baggage screening system today. So there is a benefit out of it. But now we are moving to be more proactive. And if you look in the latest years, although we had some security incidents and very serious security incidents, namely the 206 events in London, in the UK, the liquids, we have not had in-flight explosions. We are able to catch those people before they were able to actually detonate, which shows that the system which is in place works. There are areas of improvement, clearly. Yes, it is certainly not a perfect system, but certainly it is better. It is better thought to address the risk.
This is a hopeful perspective, thank you, showing that we are improving, and I think we'll face the maritime aspects and maybe also the land transport aspects once again after our coffee break. So thank you until now, and we'll meet again at 11, is it? At 11, thank you.